Well, by any measure, it's been an eventful 15 days since the Nova Scotia government tabled its budget. The document, titled Defending Nova Scotia, pledged to save the average family about $1,400 a year through tax cuts and general spending. Overall spending did increase year over year by some $763 million. However, it was the other side of the balance sheet that caught the attention of a great many groups and organizations unhappy that their grants or other funding had been cut or eliminated entirely. The backlash sparked several noisy protests last week, another one today, and still others are scheduled for later this week. This is really not the kind of negative reaction Nova Scotia's Premier has really had to deal with before, and it may have made a difference. Today, Premier Houston announced the government will reinstate $53.6 million in grants and funding to support people with disabilities, seniors, and various education initiatives for 2026-2027. Joining us tonight to discuss it, we are delighted to welcome Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston to the program. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So why walk back the cuts?
Well, I think we tabled the budget 2 weeks ago, and certainly, you know, we have a major financial situation in this province,
Sure.
Massive deficit. And I think what we did is we tried to address that, but we probably went a little too quickly on some of the items. The way I think about it is when we look at some of the things we did in the budget, we're probably a little too clinical, where they should have been more human. So we heard from Nova Scotians. We looked at some of the things they were talking about, and they were pretty clear that they thought they didn't agree with some of the decisions. So when we looked at it, we said, hey, they're right. We got it wrong. So sorry for that. Apologize for that for sure. And we're going to fix them. So that's what happened today.
The political pundits, the opposition leaders will probably say that you caved. Do you consider yourself having caved?
No, look, I listened very carefully over the last couple of weeks, but I try to always listen, and we had some really kind of rational, reasonable discussions, I would say, with people. And my caucus colleagues and the MLAs fanned out across the province. They had some reasonable discussions with people. When we came back and said, look, here's the real impact of these on people, we just kind of said, like, that's not okay. So we need to fix that. So we looked at those groups, people living with disabilities, supports for seniors, educational opportunities for African Nova Scotians and First Nations, and said, look, we have to make some changes here. We have to get this right. So that's what we've done today. There are other groups that, wish we would have kind of made some changes as well, but we can only do what we can afford, and we have to try to stick to that too.
You sound like you weren't particularly surprised by the backlash after you heard from all of your members.
Well, I think, certainly it's $19 billion of spending. There's lots of programs. The government does a lot. So when you start to look at where taxpayer dollars are going and you try to make some changes, sometimes you just miss something. And I think the things that you miss, people will tell you pretty quickly. And we were hearing from certain groups on that. And once we actually got down into it and really understood the impact on people, the impact it would have on their daily lives, that's when we kind of said, like, yeah, we got that one wrong.
So you wound up, having to stroll from Province House to your office, a trip you've made hundreds, maybe thousands of times. You wound up in one of these protests last week. It was clearly uncomfortable. The crowd was getting a little rowdy. What was going through your mind here?
Actually, I had a choice. I could have slipped out the other door and driven around the block.
Oh yeah.
But I actually consciously decided that I actually went out with the intention to speak, but the emotions were really high. They were,
Yeah.
And but I think it was good for me to kind of experience that emotion and feel that emotion. I don't think that's a bad thing, but there was a lot of emotion for sure.
Were you concerned about your safety at any point?
Look, there was, I would say no, I wasn't, but certainly there was people who were right in my face to make their point. But look, I think people care about this province. People care about their communities. They care about what happens in their communities, and I do too. We're all Nova Scotians. So to see people have a reaction to budget decisions, that doesn't surprise me. That's a good thing. It's part of democracy, and we listen carefully to that.
Any message for the protesters, both past and present? Because as it stands, we hear there might be another one later this week.
I think much of the protest has been driven by the arts community, and I think my message to them is we love our arts community. It's what makes Nova Scotia Nova Scotia. It's why people come here. It's why people visit here, why people move here. And we're making a significant investment in the arts. It'll be $66 million in this budget. That's up pretty tremendously over the last couple of years, because when we can invest, we do invest. So my message to them would be, look, we wish we could do more, and hopefully we get our economy going and we get the province moving in the right direction, and there'll be opportunities to do more. Yeah. But today we're doing $66 million, and we're supporting the sector with what we can. But my message to that group of protesters would be that, we value you tremendously, but we're doing what we can, and hopefully there'll be a day when we can do more.
And similar, I guess, for the other groups, the museums, the tourist bureaus, the authors. We heard a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these are Nova Scotians that contribute in big ways. But government, we have a $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion deficit. The deficit went up today with the decision I made.
Right.
That's a risk that we're taking, but I accept that risk because I heard from Nova Scotians that they weren't willing to accept the risk that there could be impacts on people living with disabilities or seniors or some of the educational. So they said that's a priority. It's a priority for me as well. So that's why we've made that additional investment today. But it does put the deficit up. So it puts more pressure on me and on the government to grow the economy and get some of our opportunities moving. So I accept that challenge, and I'm optimistic about it.
Some of the protesters last week, some of the pundits have said, well, maybe if you'd left the GS or the HST where it is and not cut that by 1%, and the bridge tolls, you would have money.
Yeah, so when you look at over the last couple of years and the investments that we've made in people and some of the decisions we made, like people are pushed. The price of gas is up, the price of power is up, the price of life is up. So we've made decisions to try and leave money in the pockets of Nova Scotians. So, reducing taxes leaves money in the pockets of Nova Scotians. The tolls, some of the parking fees, it all kind of puts money in their pockets. Then Nova Scotians know what to do with that money better than the government. So I guess what I would say is we're trying to support Nova Scotians, and by reducing taxes and some of the fees that we control, that's a way we can do it. I heard from an incredible amount of young people who said, look, we support the arts, we support Nova Scotians, but please don't raise our taxes. Right. But they're not necessarily going to march in the street and say that, but they feel that way.
You don't regret either of those decisions then, the tolls or the HST?
They're all decisions. I mean, look, I'm constantly reassessing, reevaluating, doing a lot of soul searching constantly in this role, because every decision that I make has an impact on Nova Scotians. But I think the decisions to leave money in the hands of Nova Scotians who really do need it, that's something that we can do. So it forces us to be a little more thoughtful on how we spend, and we need to be very thoughtful about that, is the message I receive.
And the deficit that, as you say, grew today, you'll worry about that kind of down the road, back to the drawing board? Or
we worry about it every day, but think about the investments that we made in healthcare. We're making progress in healthcare. I mean, when I first elected in 2021, I told people it's going to cost money, it's going to take time, but we will focus on healthcare. And, we've made progress. So investments in healthcare, investments in long-term care, investments in education, these are core priorities of Nova Scotians. We've made those investments. They have created a deficit. I worry about it today, I worry about it tomorrow, I worry about it every day. But I am hopeful for the future of this province, because we have incredible opportunities in our natural resources, in defense, in the offshore oil and gas. And I just think if we can get those opportunities moving, and there is momentum, but it takes, but we can get those opportunities moving, then there'll be more. And when we have more, we can do more, but we have to generate more first.
Mr. Premier, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
I appreciate
really
it.
Appreciate it. Tim Houston, Nova Scotia's Premier, joining us tonight from our studios here in Halifax.